Lyra stood frozen at the threshold of the unfamiliar doorway, her slender fingers still hovering over the control panel that had inexplicably granted her access to this chaotic space. The navigation system on her wrist device had malfunctioned 20 minutes ago, leaving her stranded in what the Nexus Station directory politely termed Human Residential Sector B, but what her Xylan colleagues more accurately called the Chaos Zone. She had been attempting to find her way back to the research quadrant when she'd accidentally triggered this door. Now she found herself staring into what appeared to be someone's private quarters, a someone who was currently looking back at her with equal surprise. "Well," said the human male, setting down what looked like a partially disassembled engine component, "either I've won some kind of alien visitor lottery, or you're extremely lost." Lyra straightened her posture, her pale blue skin flushing slightly darker around her cheekbones. "I apologize for the intrusion. There appears to be a malfunction in the station's navigation systems. Or perhaps," she added with a hint of disapproval, "in the logical organization of your sector's layout." The human grinned, revealing teeth that seemed unnecessarily numerous to Lyra's sensibilities. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair that refused to stay in any particular direction and a face that bore evidence of frequent smiling. His hands and the front of his utility jumpsuit were stained with engine oil. "No apology needed. I'm Jax," he said, wiping his hands on a rag that seemed to make them dirtier rather than cleaner. "Freelance cargo pilot, occasional mechanic, and now, apparently, rescuer of lost Xylans." "I'm not lost," Lyra corrected automatically. "I am temporarily disoriented due to external technological failure." She hesitated before adding, "My name is Lyra. I am a linguist and archaeological specialist from Xylos, currently assigned to Research Team Delta 7. Jax leaned against a workbench that was covered in a bewildering array of tools, spare parts, and what appeared to be the remains of at least 3 different meals. "Well, Lyra from Xylos, would you like to come in while you reorient yourself? I've got coffee, or something approximating tea, if you'd prefer." Lyra's first instinct was to decline. Every aspect of this human's living space violated the principles of order that govern Xylan society. The room was a converted cargo hold, clearly designed as temporary accommodation, but modified with a haphazard collection of furnishings. A narrow bunk was built into one wall, covered with rumpled bedding. Shelves lined another wall, packed with objects from what must have been dozens of different worlds. A small kitchenette area occupied one corner, and various mechanical projects in different states of completion filled most of the remaining space. Yet something about the room's lived-in warmth made her hesitate, and her navigation system would take at least 15 minutes to reboot. "I suppose that would be acceptable. Thank you." Jax's grin widened as he cleared a stack of what looked like vintage paper flight manuals from a chair. "Have a seat. Sorry about the mess. I wasn't expecting company, especially not the interspecies kind." Lyra perched carefully on the edge of the chair, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. "Do all humans live in such dynamic environments?" Jax laughed as he moved to the kitchenette. "Dynamic. That's diplomatic. Most would just say disaster zone. And no, I'm probably on the extreme end of the disorganization spectrum, but I like to think of it as creative chaos. Everything important has a place. It's just not always the same place." He filled a kettle and set it on a heating element. "So, linguistics and archaeology? You study dead languages or something?" "I specialize in cross-cultural communication artifacts and linguistic evolution patterns across non-human species," Lyra replied. "My current project involves analyzing communication methods used by the extinct Vortex civilization, particularly focusing on their symbolic writing system and its parallels with early Xylan glyph structures." "Sounds fascinating," Jax said, with what seemed like genuine interest. "So you're basically a space detective for dead languages." Lyra blinked, startled by the simplified but not entirely inaccurate characterization. "I suppose that is one way to conceptualize it." The kettle began to whistle, and Jax poured hot water into 2 mismatched containers. He brought one over to Lyra, a chipped mug with faded lettering that read Martian Mining Corporation. It's a herbal blend from Centauri Prime, he explained. No caffeine or stimulants, just nice flavors. Should be compatible with Xylan biology. I've shared it with your kind before. Lyra accepted the mug cautiously. The aroma was pleasant, floral with hints of something like cinnamon. She took a small sip and was surprised by the complex, slightly sweet taste. This is quite good, she admitted. One of the perks of flying cargo routes is you get to sample stuff from all over, Jack said, settling into another chair with his own drink. So what brings a Xylan linguist to this part of Nexus? Research facilities are usually over in the East Quadrant. As I mentioned, my navigation system malfunctioned. I was attempting to return to my assigned quarters after a meeting with the station's archives director. She glanced at her wrist device. The system is still rebooting. Those Nexus NAV systems are notoriously finicky in this sector, Jax nodded. Something about the old cargo bay shield generators creating interference. You're welcome to wait out here. Lyra took another sip of her tea, using the moment to study her surroundings more carefully. What she had initially perceived as pure disorder began to reveal patterns. The mechanical parts were generally grouped by type. The items on the shelves, while eclectic, seemed arranged by planet of origin or perhaps sentimental value. Her gaze stopped on a small crystalline sculpture that was unmistakably Xylan in design, a mathematical representation of universal harmony, typically given as a gift to mark important academic achievements. You have an Envari crystal, she observed, surprised. It's an authentic piece. Jax followed her gaze to the shelf. Oh, that. Yeah, I transported a Xylan mathematics delegation about 3 years ago. One of them, Professor something with too many consonants, gave it to me after I managed to fix their environmental controls during transit. Said something about appreciating practical applications of theoretical principles. He smiled. I just thought it was pretty. It's a significant gift, Lyra said. Envari crystals are grown over decades and precisely cut to represent mathematical constants. They're typically awarded for scholarly achievements or given to honor important intellectual contributions. Jax looked at the crystal with new appreciation. And here I thought it was just a fancy paperweight. Though I've never actually used it as one, he added hastily, noticing Lyra's expression. It's always had its special spot on the shelf. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant hum of the station's environmental systems. Jax shifted in his seat. Are you hungry? I've got some snacks that should be cross-species compatible. Without waiting for an answer, he stood and rummaged through a storage compartment, producing a small container. These are pretty popular with everyone. Cloud puffs from the gas farms on Jupiter's moons. He opened the container to reveal what looked like small, iridescent marshmallows. They're basically condensed vapor with natural sugars. They dissolve on your tongue. Lyra hesitated, then carefully selected one of the smaller pieces. On Xylos, food was primarily functional, precisely calibrated nutrient combinations designed for optimal health and energy. Eating for pleasure was considered an occasional indulgence, not a daily practice. The cloud puff seemed to shimmer between her fingers. She placed it cautiously on her tongue, where it immediately began to melt, releasing bursts of sweet, subtle flavor that reminded her of the rare flowering fruits that grew in the conservation domes back home. This is, she paused, searching for the appropriate descriptor, quite pleasant. Jax grinned. That's diplomat speak for surprisingly not terrible. Try another. The pink ones have a berry-like flavor. Almost without thinking, Lyra reached for another cloud puff. As she did, she glanced at her wrist device. The navigation system had completed its reboot process and was now displaying her location and a clear path back to her quarters. She should leave immediately. Her unscheduled absence would already have been noted by her research team. Yet she found herself strangely reluctant to depart this chaotic little space and its unexpectedly interesting inhabitant. Your system's working again? Jax asked, noticing her glance. Yes, Lyra admitted. It appears to have recovered its functionality. Well, don't let me keep you. I'm sure you've got important ancient languages waiting for you. His tone was light, but Lyra thought she detected a hint of disappointment. She should stand, thank him for his hospitality, and leave. That would be the logical course of action. the Xylan course of action. Instead, she heard herself say, "Perhaps I could stay a few more minutes to ensure the system stabilizes completely." Jax's smile returned, brighter than before. "Absolutely. System stabilization is crucial. Wouldn't want you getting lost again." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So, tell me more about these dead languages you're chasing. What makes them so interesting?" As Lyra began to explain her work, she felt something within her relax just slightly, like a tightly wound string being allowed the smallest measure of slack. The feeling was unfamiliar, disconcerting, and inexplicably pleasant. The few more minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Jax proved to be an attentive listener, asking surprisingly insightful questions about her research. He shared stories of his own travels, planets she had only read about in scientific journals, described with a vivid enthusiasm that made them seem somehow more real than all her careful studies. "And that's when I realized the religious artifact I'd been hired to transport was actually a glorified back-scratcher," Jax concluded, laughing at his own story. The Arcturian ambassador had to explain to the museum curators that the sacred ceremonial implement for communing with ancestral spirits was actually just a really fancy tool for reaching itchy spots between their dorsal ridges. A small sound escaped Lyra's throat, a laugh, she realized with surprise. When had she last laughed? Truly laughed. Not the polite acknowledgement of humor that was acceptable in Xylan academic circles. She became aware of Jax watching her, his expression warm and curious. "You know, you have a nice laugh. You should use it more often." Lyra felt her skin flush a deeper blue. Xylan society values emotional moderation. Excessive displays of amusement are considered undisciplined. "Sounds exhausting," Jax commented, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "Always having to police your own reactions." "It is our way," Lyra said automatically, but the response felt hollow, a recorded message played too many times. "It promotes clarity of thought and purpose." "Maybe," Jax said, "or maybe it just makes it harder to recognize when something genuinely moves you." He stood and walked to the shelf with his collection of items. "Here, look at this." He carefully lifted a small object that resembled a smooth stone with swirling patterns of green and gold. "I found this on a beach on Talaris 3. It's just a rock. Not valuable, not useful. But when I saw it, it made me feel, I don't know, connected to something bigger. Like the whole universe had conspired to create this one perfect little thing, just so I could find it one day." He placed it gently in Lyra's palm. It was warm to the touch, the patterns indeed mesmerizing. "On Xylos, we have collections," she said slowly. "But they are organized, categorized, educational. And there's nothing wrong with that," Jax said. "But sometimes the things that matter most to us don't fit into neat categories. They just matter." Lyra's communication device chimed suddenly, startling her so much that she nearly dropped the stone. The message scrolling across her screen was from Research Coordinator Vexel, inquiring about her absence from the afternoon analysis session and requesting immediate confirmation of her status. Reality crashed back around her. She had lost track of time completely, something that had never happened in her meticulously scheduled adult life. "I must go," she said, rising quickly and returning the stone to Jax. "I've missed a mandatory research session. This is unprecedented." Jax looked concerned. "We be in trouble?" "It is not a question of trouble," Lyra replied, though it absolutely was. "It is a matter of professional responsibility. I have never failed to attend a scheduled session before." "Tell them you are conducting impromptu cross-cultural research," Jax suggested with a small smile. "It's not even a lie." Despite her growing anxiety, Lyra felt her lips twitch upward. "I doubt Research Coordinator Vexel would consider conversations with a human cargo pilot to be valid research." "Their loss," Jax shrugged. He walked her to the door. "Well, if your navigation system malfunctions again, you know where to find me." Doors usually unlocked. Hazard of living in what's technically a storage area. Lyra hesitated at the threshold. The logical thing would be to thank him politely and leave, resuming her ordered existence, never mentioning this strange interlude to anyone. perhaps even requesting a memory adjustment to remove the disruptive experience. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Are you typically here during the station's designated evening cycle?" Jax's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. Then he smiled. "Most evenings, yeah. Either here or at Bay 12 working on my ship." "Why? Planning another navigational failure?" "That would be illogical," Lyra replied seriously. "But perhaps a deliberate visit would not be entirely without merit. From an anthropological perspective." "Anthropological perspective. Right." Jax's smile widened. "Well, Professor Lyra, my chaotic human habitat remains open for your rigorous scientific observation anytime." "I'm not a professor," she corrected automatically. Yet, Jax repeated. "I like the confidence." With a final nod, Lyra stepped back into the corridor, the door sliding shut behind her. She stood there a moment, uncertain why she felt so strange, as if she'd left something important behind, or perhaps brought something unexpected away with her. Her wrist device chimed again, more insistently. With a deep breath, she composed herself and began the walk back to her assigned sector, already formulating explanations for her absence. What she could not explain, even to herself, was why her thoughts kept returning to a cluttered room that smelled of engine oil and herbal tea, and the human who had called her laugh nice. The next evening's cycle found Lyra standing outside Jax's door again, her hand poised hesitantly over the entry panel. She had spent the day catching up on her missed work, offering a carefully crafted explanation about investigating an anomalous signal that had drawn her to a different section of the station. Research Coordinator Vexel had accepted the explanation with skepticism, but no formal reprimand. Now Lyra was faced with a decision that seemed unexpectedly significant. She could simply walk away, return to her quarters, and resume her normal routine. That would be the logical choice, the Xylan choice. Instead, she pressed the door panel. It slid open immediately to reveal Jax sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by components of what appeared to be a small propulsion system. He looked up, surprise quickly giving way to a wide smile. "The navigation systems must be really malfunctioning today," he said, setting aside a tool. "Or is this that anthropological research you mentioned?" "The latter," Lyra replied, remaining at the threshold. "Though if you're occupied, I can return another time." "Not at all." Jax scrambled to his feet, hastily clearing a path through the mechanical parts. "Just some tinkering with a backup thruster. Nothing that can't wait." He gestured her inside, quickly clearing off the chair she had used the day before. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come back. Figured you might have second thoughts about fraternizing with the disorganized human element." "I did have considerations," Lyra admitted, stepping carefully into the room. "But I found our conversation yesterday to be unexpectedly stimulating. From a comparative cultural perspective, is that Xylan for I had fun?" Jax asked with a knowing smile. Lyra felt her skin warm slightly. "We do not typically frame experiences in terms of fun. We evaluate them based on productivity, intellectual value, and contribution to collective knowledge." "And how did yesterday rate on those scales?" Jax asked, moving to the kitchenette area. Lyra considered carefully. "It was difficult to categorize within standard assessment parameters." Jax laughed as he prepared 2 drinks. "I'll take that as a compliment." "Tea again? Or I've got some fruit juice from Ganymede that's pretty amazing. Tastes like a summer day on Earth, if summer had purple lightning storms." "The juice sounds interesting," Lyra decided, surprising herself with the quick answer. As Jax poured the vividly colored liquid into glasses, Lyra took the opportunity to observe the room more carefully. Despite the apparent disorder, she began to recognize what might be called a system, albeit one that prioritized accessibility over organization. Frequently used tools were within easy reach of the workspace. Personal items were displayed where they could be seen and enjoyed rather than stored efficiently. "Your living space," she began, accepting the glass Jax offered. "It is not merely disorderly. It has its own structure, doesn't it? Based on used patterns and personal significance rather than conventional organizational principles." Jax looked pleased as he sat across from her. "Exactly. I always know where everything is, even if no one else could possibly figure it out. It's organized for me, not for a universal standard. He took a sip of his drink. I'm guessing your quarters don't look anything like this? No, Lyra admitted. Xylan living spaces are designed for maximum efficiency and minimal distraction. Personal possessions are limited and stored appropriately when not in use. Sounds sterile, Jax commented. We find it conducive to clear thinking, Lyra replied. But even to her own ears, the response sounded rehearsed. And what do you think? Jax asked, leaning forward slightly. Not what Xylans think generally, what does Lyra think? Does your perfectly organized room feel like home? The question caught her off guard. Home. Her quarters were a temporary assignment, functional and appropriate to her status. Like all Xylans, she maintained a permanent residence on their home world, visited only during designated leave periods. Neither space had ever been evaluated on how it felt. I have not considered my accommodations in those terms, she admitted. Try this, Jack suggested. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the place where you feel most comfortable. Where? Do you imagine yourself? Lyra hesitated, then closed her eyes. The expected image of her precisely arranged workspace or her childhood home's efficient design did not materialize. Instead, she found herself picturing the Natural Conservation Dome on Xylos Prime, with its carefully preserved but still somewhat wild ecosystem. The one place where Xylan control gave way, slightly, to nature's inherent patterns. There is a botanical preservation area on my home world, she said slowly, opening her eyes. It is designed to maintain endangered species in conditions that approximate their natural habitats. As a child, I would sometimes visit with my educational cohort. I found it fascinating because it was different, Jack suggested, a little unpredictable compared to everything else. Perhaps, Lyra admitted. She looked around the room again. Your space reminds me somewhat of that place. Not in appearance, obviously, but in feeling. There's life here. Spontaneity. Jax's smile softened. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my mess. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Jax told her about his latest cargo run, a delicate negotiation involving 3 different species and a shipment of temperature-sensitive spores. Lyra found herself sharing details about her research that she typically omitted in formal reports. The excitement of deciphering a particularly challenging symbol set, the satisfaction of connecting disparate linguistic patterns across star systems. Before she realized it, hours had passed. Her communication device remained silent. She had carefully scheduled this personal research time in her official calendar to avoid interruptions. Want to see something cool? Jax asked suddenly, setting aside his empty glass. It's something I picked up on my last run through the Cygnus sector. Without waiting for an answer, he moved to a storage compartment and extracted a small metallic cube. Setting it on the low table between them, he pressed a sequence on its surface. The cube unfolded itself like a geometric flower, panels sliding outward to reveal a glowing central core. From this core, points of light emerged, expanding outward to fill the space above the table with a 3-dimensional star map. It's a stellar cartography device made by the Eldery, Jax explained, his face illuminated by the soft blue glow. They map stars based on their musical resonance patterns rather than just spatial coordinates. Watch. He touched one of the hovering stars, and a gentle tone filled the room, a complex chord that seemed to shift and evolve even as it sustained. That's Betelgeuse, he said. And this, he touched another point of light, producing a completely different harmonic sound, is Rigel. The Eldery believe every star has a unique sonic signature. When you learn to read their maps, you navigate by sound as much as sight. Lyra leaned forward, fascinated. This is remarkable technology. The Xylan Science Academy would consider this a significant artifact. You want to try? Jax offered, gesturing to the glowing constellation. Hesitantly, Lyra reached out and touched a small cluster of stars. A cascade of interwoven tones filled the room, harmonies and counterpoints that created a strangely moving composition. The Pleiades, Jax identified, watching her reaction. They call it the sister's song. Lyra touched another star, then another, creating an impromptu melody that filled the small room. She found herself smiling, not the controlled, professional acknowledgement she typically allowed herself, but a genuine expression of delight. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "We have nothing like this on Xylos. Our star maps are precise, detailed, but they contain only factual data. Nothing of how the stars might feel. Maybe that's something your research could incorporate," Jack suggested. "Different ways cultures perceive and record the same universe." Lyra nodded slowly, her mind already connecting this experience to her work. "There are parallels in the vortex symbolic language I've been studying. They used emotional resonance patterns in their writing systems, something we've been trying to decode for decades. See, hanging out with disorganized humans might advance your research after all," Jack said with a grin. "Indeed," Lyra agreed, surprised to realize how true it was. Her time with Jax didn't feel wasted or frivolous anymore. It felt like opening a door she hadn't known existed. As the stellar map continued to glow between them, casting its soft light across their faces, Lyra experienced a moment of clarity. There was more to understanding the universe than cataloging and categorizing it. There was also the simple joy of discovery, of connection across differences. It was a realization that both exhilarated and frightened her. After that evening, Lyra found herself creating reasons to return to Jax's quarters. Each visit was carefully scheduled into her calendar as comparative cultural research or alternative perspective consultation. Descriptions that were technically accurate but failed entirely to capture the reality of these encounters. The reality was simple and increasingly undeniable. She enjoyed Jax's company. She enjoyed the unpredictability of their conversations, the way his mind made connections her Xylan education would never have considered. She enjoyed watching him work on his mechanical projects, his hands moving with practiced precision despite their apparent carelessness. She even enjoyed the chaotic comfort of his living space, which now felt more familiar than her own sterile quarters. One evening, a week after their first meeting, Jax was attempting to teach her a card game from Earth called poker, a concept that simultaneously fascinated and perplexed her Xylan sensibilities. "The entire premise involves deliberate deception," she observed, studying her cards with a furrowed brow. "It's not deception, it's strategy," Jax corrected, arranging his own cards. "The fun isn't trying to read your opponent while concealing your own position. On Xylos, deliberately concealing information is considered ethically problematic in most contexts," Lyra noted, though she continued to play. "That explains why you're terrible at bluffing," Jax teased as he easily read her reaction to drawing a good card. "Your face gives everything away." "Xylan facial musculature is less expressive than human equivalents," Lyra protested. "Maybe naturally," Jax agreed. "But you, Lyra, are an open book, at least to me." The statement made her pause. Was she becoming more expressive, more human in her mannerisms? The thought should have alarmed her. Instead, she felt a strange warmth at the idea that Jax could read her so well. Their game was interrupted by an urgent chime from Lyra's communication device. The message that scrolled across her screen made her stomach tighten uncomfortably. "Is everything okay?" Jax asked, noticing her change in posture. "It is Research Coordinator Vexel," Lyra said, her voice carefully controlled. "The preliminary report on my Vortec language analysis is due tomorrow, and she is requesting a progress update. I have been," she hesitated, "less productive than expected these past days." "Because you've been spending time here," Jax finished for her, his expression shifting to concern. "I'm sorry if I've been distracting you from your work." "The responsibility is mine," Lyra said firmly. "I have made choices about how to allocate my time." She began gathering her things. "I should return to my quarters and work through the night cycle to complete the analysis." "Let me help," Jax offered unexpectedly. Lyra looked at him in surprise. "You're not trained in xenolinguistics or archaeological analysis." "No, but I'm good at seeing patterns that others miss. And sometimes a fresh perspective helps." He shrugged. Plus, for hands work faster than two. I could at least help organize your data, or something. Lyra considered the offer. Having Jax in her quarters would be unusual, potentially problematic if discovered. Yet the practical assistance might make a significant difference, and the thought of his company during the long night of work was unexpectedly appealing. Very well, she decided, but we must be discreet. Visitors to the research quarters are generally discouraged, particularly those without academic clearance. I can be stealthy when needed, Jax assured her with a grin. Comes with the territory when you're sometimes hauling cargo of questionable legality. Lyra raised an eyebrow. I did not hear that confession, as it would obligate me to report it to station security. Theoretical cargo of theoretical, questionable legality. Jax amended with a wink. Let me grab a few things, and we'll go save your research project. 30 minutes later, they had successfully navigated the less-traveled corridors of Nexus Station to reach Lyra's quarters in the research section. The contrast between her living space and Jax's was immediately apparent. The room was precisely arranged. Minimal furnishings in neutral colors, work materials organized by project and relevance. Personal items limited to a small shelf containing 3 precisely spaced objects. A traditional Xylan achievement crystal, a family lineage marker, and a small replica of an ancient Vortec artifact. Well, Jack said after a moment, it's definitely clean. It is efficient, Lyra corrected, suddenly seeing her quarters through his eyes. Had it always seemed so sterile? So lifeless? She pushed the thought aside and activated her work terminal. The Vortec language patterns are here. I've identified several recurring symbol clusters that appear to be emotionally rather than informationally significant, but I'm having difficulty establishing their contextual meaning. Jax peered at the complex symbols displayed on the screen. They look a bit like musical notation, he observed. See how these curves flow? It reminds me of the Eldery star map harmonies. Lyra blinked, looking at the patterns with new eyes. That is an interesting observation. The Vortec were known to have highly developed auditory perception. Their architectural structures often incorporated acoustic elements that responded to specific sound patterns. Maybe they didn't just write their language. They heard it, Jack suggested, leaning closer to the screen. What if these symbols represent sound patterns that trigger emotional responses? Like how certain musical chords make humans feel happy or sad or tense. The idea hit Lyra with almost physical force. It was so obvious, once suggested, yet completely outside the analytical framework she had been trained to use. Could the key to understanding Vortec emotional signifiers be not in their visual arrangement, but in their acoustic properties? Jax, that could be revolutionary, she said slowly. If these symbols are meant to be translated into sound, rather than just meaning, worth trying, right? He said with an encouraging smile. For the next several hours, they worked together, Lyra applying her extensive knowledge of the Vortec civilization and linguistic principles, Jax offering intuitive insights that repeatedly shifted her perspective in productive new directions. They created a provisional translation matrix that converted the visual symbols into sound patterns, then tested it against known Vortec ceremonial texts. The results were promising, better than promising. Patterns that had resisted traditional analysis for years began to yield their secrets when approached as auditory rather than visual communication. As the station's night cycle deepened around them, Lyra found herself working with an energy and enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. The rigid methodology she'd been trained in fell away as she followed intuitive leaps, tested unconventional hypotheses, and built on Jax's observations. Try matching this sequence with the architectural resonance patterns from the Temple of Echoes, she suggested, passing him a data tablet. If there's a correlation between their ceremonial spaces and language structures. On it, Jax replied, already inputting the parameters. His technical aptitude had proven surprisingly applicable to the research systems, his skills with mechanical interfaces translating well to the analytical tools. They worked seamlessly together, anticipating each other's needs, building on each other's ideas. When the analysis program finally produced a comprehensive pattern match that verified their theory, they both stared at the results in stunned silence. "We did it," Lyra whispered finally. This could redefine our entire understanding of Vortec communication systems." "You did it," Jax corrected. "I just provided a little outside perspective." "No," Lyra insisted, turning to face him. "I would never have considered this approach without your insight. This discovery belongs to both of us." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the space between them. Lyra became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way the blue light from the terminal illuminated Jax's features, of the warmth radiating from his body. Without conscious thought, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of connection that went beyond words. Jax glanced down at her hand, then back to her face, his expression softening into something she couldn't quite name, but recognized nonetheless. The moment was broken by an alert from the terminal, reminding her that the completed report needed to be submitted within the hour. Lyra withdrew her hand quickly, turning back to the screen. "I should format these findings," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Research Coordinator Vexel will require comprehensive documentation." "Right?" Jax agreed, stepping back slightly. "I should probably head out anyway. Wouldn't want to cause any problems if someone stops by." He moved toward the door, but paused before reaching it. "Will you tell them about how you made the breakthrough?" Lyra hesitated. The Xylan academic system valued rigorous methodology and peer-reviewed processes. A breakthrough based on an intuitive suggestion from an untrained human cargo pilot would be viewed with skepticism at best, dismissed outright at worst. "I will acknowledge that alternative perspective consultation contributed to the discovery," she said carefully. "The specifics may require diplomatic phrasing." Jax nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. "Makes sense. Wouldn't want to undermine your academic credibility with tales of poker games and stellar music." "Jax," Lyra began, feeling suddenly that something important needed to be said, though she wasn't sure what. "It's okay," he assured her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I get it. Different worlds, different rules. I'm glad I could help, even if it stays between us." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door sliding shut behind him. Lyra stood motionless for a moment, staring at the closed door, feeling as though something precious had slipped through her fingers. With a deep breath, she turned back to her work. The breakthrough they had made was genuine and significant. Her report to Research Coordinator Vexel would be comprehensive and impressive, perhaps the most important contribution she had made to her field thus far. Yet as she carefully documented the methodology and findings, she felt a strange hollowness beneath her professional satisfaction. When the finished report was finally submitted, just before the deadline, Lyra sat back in her chair and surveyed her meticulously organized quarters. For the first time, she consciously registered the silence, the stillness, the absence of unexpected questions or laughter or the scent of engine oil mingled with herbal tea. The absence of Jax. The following days brought a flurry of academic interest in Lyra's breakthrough. Her report had been received with initial skepticism, but quickly gained recognition as other researchers applied her methodology to previously intractable Vortec texts with remarkable success. Research Coordinator Vexel had personally commended her innovative approach, noting with approval that Lyra had demonstrated surprising adaptability in her analytical framework. Lyra accepted the praise and fielded the questions with professional composure, attributing her insights to interdisciplinary consideration of auditory-visual correlation patterns, technically accurate if significantly understated. She did not mention Jax, though his presence hovered at the edges of every explanation she gave. 5 days after their night of collaborative discovery, Lyra found herself unable to focus on the follow-up analysis she was supposed to be conducting. Her thoughts kept drifting to Jax's quarters, wondering what he was doing, whether he was working on a ship or entertaining himself with one of his vintage games or simply relaxing in his chaotic, comfortable space. She had not returned since that night. Professional obligations provided a convenient excuse, but the truth was more complicated. Something had changed between them, Or perhaps something had simply become impossible to ignore any longer. After staring unseeing at her terminal for 20 minutes, Lyra made a decision. She closed the research files, changed from her formal work attire into simpler clothing, and left her quarters. The walk to the human residential sector seemed both longer and shorter than she remembered. When she reached Jax's door, she hesitated, her finger hovering over the entry panel. What if he was angry with her? What if he wasn't there at all? What if? The door slid open before she could press the panel, revealing Jax in the act of leaving, a tool bag slung over his shoulder. He stopped abruptly, surprise evident on his face. "Lyra," he said, recovering quickly. "I was just heading to Bay 12. Got a coolant system that needs checking before my next run. You're leaving?" The question came out more vulnerable than she had intended. "Just for a few hours," Jax clarified. Then, after a pause, "Unless you meant the station? That's not until next week. Regular supply, run to Proxima Centauri." "I see." Lyra's mind caught on his casual mention of departure. Of course Jax wouldn't stay on Nexus indefinitely. He was a cargo pilot, constantly moving between systems. This temporary docking was just that, temporary. "I apologize for interrupting your work schedule. I can return another time." She turned to leave, but Jax's voice stopped her. "Lyra, wait." He set down his tool bag. "The coolant system's not urgent. It can wait." His expression softened. "How did your report go over? Are you the toast of the Xylan research community now?" "Toast?" Lyra's brow furrowed at the unfamiliar idiom. "Celebrated," Jax clarified with a small smile. "Admired?" "Oh." Lyra hesitated. The report was well received. The methodology is being implemented by several research teams studying similar artifacts. "That's great," Jack said sincerely. "You deserved the recognition." An awkward silence fell between them, something that had never happened before, even from their first meeting. Lyra found herself uncharacteristically struggling for words. "I failed to properly acknowledge your contribution," she finally said. "The breakthrough would not have occurred without your insight. I should have made that clear in my report." Jax waved a hand dismissively. "I told you it's fine. I understand how these things work. Academic credentials matter in your world." "They do," Lyra admitted. "But perhaps they should not matter to the exclusion of truth." She met his eyes directly. "And the truth is that you change how I see my work." "How I see many things." Jax's expression shifted, the casual mask falling away to reveal something more vulnerable. "And how do you see things now, Lyra?" It was a simple question that demanded a complicated answer, one that challenged everything she had been taught about herself and her place in the universe. Lyra took a deep breath. "I see that order and chaos are not opposites to be valued and avoided, but complementary aspects of a balanced existence. I see that my pursuit of perfect structure has sometimes prevented me from recognizing organic patterns of greater beauty." She paused, gathering courage for the most difficult admission. "And I see that in avoiding emotional entanglement, I have denied myself experiences of significant value." Jax took a step closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Experiences like what?" "Like this," Lyra said simply. "Being here, with you, in this space that defies all logical organization, yet somehow feels more right than anywhere else I have been." The words hung between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Jax's smile returned slowly, warming his entire face. "That," he said softly, "sounds suspiciously like a Xylan saying they've been having fun." Lyra felt her lips curve upward, no longer fighting the expression. "Perhaps it is." Jax gestured toward the open door of his quarters. "Want to come in and have some more of this valuable experience?" As Lyra stepped inside, she noticed small changes to the familiar space. A portion of the main table had been cleared and organized with precise spacing between objects. A shelf near the sleeping area now held a small collection of information tablets arranged by size and subject. The changes were minimal in the overall chaos of the room, but their meaning was clear. Jax had been making space for her, in his way. "You've been implementing organizational principles," she observed, touching the neatly arranged table corner. Jack shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. Just thought it might make you more comfortable. Not that I expected you to come back, necessarily, but just in case. The gesture touched her more deeply than she could express. Instead of trying to find words, Lyra did something entirely uncharacteristic. She reached out and took Jax's hand in hers. His fingers closed around hers automatically, warm and solid. The physical contact sent a current of awareness through her that both alarmed and exhilarated her Xylan sensibilities. Touch between adults on Xylos was primarily functional, rarely casual, and certainly not lingering. "Is this okay?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "More than okay," Jax assured her, his voice unexpectedly rough. His thumb traced a gentle pattern across her knuckles, sending another wave of sensation up her arm. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by their clasped hands, the simple contact somehow more intimate than any interaction Lyra had experienced before. So, Jax finally broke the silence, his tone lighter but his grip no less firm. "What made you come back? Missing my charming personality? Or was it the cloud puffs?" "I found I cannot focus on my work," Lyra admitted. "My thoughts were elsewhere. With me." The hope in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes," she said simply. "With you." Jax's smile widened. "I've been having the same problem. Kept dropping tools because I was wondering what you were doing, if your colleagues were properly appreciating your breakthrough, if you'd ever want to see my disorganized self again." "I do," Lyra said. "Want to see you again. And again after that." She hesitated, then added the difficult truth, "But I am uncertain how to reconcile these feelings with my responsibilities, my cultural expectations. On Xylos, relationships follow prescribed patterns, defined progressions. This is chaos," Jax suggested with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "Uncharted," Lyra corrected. "Like a star map with no coordinates. Or maybe," Jax countered, "like an elderly map, navigated by feeling rather than calculation." Before Lyra could respond, her communication device chimed with an urgent alert. The message that appeared made her blood run cold. "What is it?" Jax asked, immediately sensing her distress. "It's from Dr. Naren, the head of the Xenolinguistics division," Lyra said, her voice carefully controlled despite the panic rising within her. "He is currently on Nexus for a field research assessment and wishes to meet with me immediately to discuss my recent breakthrough. He's specifically requesting access to my original research notes and analytical process documentation." "Is that bad?" Jax asked, concern evident in his eyes. "It is problematic," Lyra said carefully. "Dr. Naren is both brilliant and thoroughly traditional in his methodological approach. If he reviews my process in detail, he will immediately recognize the unorthodox nature of our discovery. His approval is crucial for my continued research, funding, and professional advancement. So you need to impress a stuffy academic who won't appreciate the actual genius of what you did," Jack summarized. "When is this meeting?" "In 47 minutes, Lyra replied, already calculating how much time she would need to prepare appropriate documentation that would satisfy scrutiny without revealing the full truth. "Okay," Jack said decisively. "Here's what we do. You go back and get ready for your meeting. I'll come by your quarters in 20 minutes to help you prepare convincing research notes that your Dr. Naren will approve of. We can create a plausible research progression that leads to your breakthrough without mentioning stellar music maps or disorganized cargo pilots." Despite her anxiety, Lyra felt a rush of gratitude for his immediate understanding and willingness to help. "You would do that?" "Of course," Jack said as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. "That's what you do when you care about someone. You help them shine, even if it means staying in the shadows yourself." The simple declaration struck Lyra like a physical force. Care about someone. The Xylan language had precise terms for collegial respect, familial obligation, and even reproductive attraction. But the human concept of caring encompassed something both simpler and more profound than any of those. And Jax cared about her. The realization should have complicated her already tangled emotions. Instead, it brought a sudden clarity. Whatever this was between them, This uncharted territory with no Xylan classification. It mattered. He mattered. "Thank you," she said, the words entirely inadequate for what she felt. Jax released her hand reluctantly. "Go. I'll be there soon with my most convincing academic impersonation." The meeting with Dr. Naren was both more and less difficult than Lyra had anticipated. The distinguished xenolinguist was indeed impressed with her breakthrough, particularly after reviewing the carefully constructed research progression that she and Jax had hastily assembled before the meeting. "Your methodological approach shows surprising creativity, researcher Lyra," Dr. Naren noted, his tone mixing approval and slight suspicion. "This connection between visual symbolism and acoustic resonance patterns is not one I would have anticipated from your previous work. My research on Nexus has exposed me to diverse analytical frameworks," Lyra replied carefully. "The station's multicultural environment encourages alternative perspectives." "Indeed." Dr. Naren studied her face for a long moment. "I look forward to seeing how you develop these insights further. The Xylan Science Academy will be watching your progress with interest." The implied pressure in that statement was unmistakable. Lyra's breakthrough had put her in the spotlight, a position that offered both opportunity and scrutiny. Any deviation from Xylan research protocols would be immediately noticed and evaluated. After Dr. Naren departed, Lyra returned to her quarters to find Jax waiting, his expression anxious. "How did it go?" he asked as soon as the door closed behind her. "He was impressed," Lyra said, allowing herself a small smile of relief. "He accepted our constructed methodology without significant question. I believe my position is secure, at least for now." "That's great." Jax's smile faded slightly as he noted her reserved response. "Isn't it?" Lyra moved to the window of her quarters, looking out at the vast starfield beyond Nexus Station. "It is professionally advantageous, yes. But Dr. Naren's interest means increased scrutiny of my work and activities. My freedom to explore unconventional approaches may be limited going forward." "Freedom to hang out with humans in messy quarters, you mean?" Jax said, coming to stand beside her at the window. "Among other things," Lyra agreed quietly. They stood in silence for a moment, the implications settling between them. Finally, Jax spoke. "When I was a kid, my grandfather had an old Earth saying, 'You can't serve two masters.' I never really understood what he meant until I tried working for two different shipping companies at once." He smiled ruefully at the memory. "It didn't end well." "You believe I am attempting to serve two incompatible priorities," Lyra observed. "I think you're trying to be true to two different parts of yourself," Jax corrected gently. "The dedicated Xylan researcher who values order and tradition, and the curious explorer who's discovered she might enjoy a little chaos now and then." He turned to face her fully. "For what it's worth, I think both those parts of you are pretty amazing. But I don't know if your culture, or mine for that matter, makes much room for being two things at once." The truth of his words resonated painfully. Xylan society valued specialization, consistency, adherence to established patterns. Her recent behavior, her time with Jax, her unconventional research approach represented a deviation that would be viewed with concern at best, active correction at worst. "I leave for my Proxima Centauri run in 5 days," Jax said into the silence. "It's a 3-week round trip. Maybe that time apart would give you a chance to figure out which path feels right for you." The thought of not seeing Jax for 3 weeks created an unexpected hollow sensation in Lyra's chest. At the same time, she recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. She needed space to consider what she truly wanted, free from the immediate influence of either Xylan expectations or Jax's compelling presence. "That would be logical," she acknowledged, though the words felt empty. Jax's expression tightened briefly before he controlled it. "Right. Logical." He stepped back slightly. "I should probably go. You've had a long day, and I've got prep work for the run." "Jax," Lyra began, uncertain what she wanted to say, but knowing she couldn't let him leave like this. "It's okay," he assured her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Whatever you decide, whatever path you choose, I'll understand. Just He hesitated, then continued more softly, "Just make sure it's what you want, not what everyone else expects of you." With that, he turned and left, the door sliding shut behind him with a finality that seemed to echo in the suddenly empty room. The following days passed in a blur of professional obligations and internal conflict. Lyra threw herself into her work, applying her breakthrough methodology to additional Vortec artifacts with continued success. Her colleagues noted her increased productivity with approval, attributing it to the validation from Dr. Naren's visit. Only Lyra knew that her frenetic pace was driven less by professional ambition than by the need to occupy her mind, to fill the spaces that might otherwise be consumed by thoughts of Jax, of his quarters, of the way her hand felt in his. She had not returned to human residential Sector B. The logical part of her insisted this was the correct choice, a necessary separation to gain perspective. The growing, unruly part of her that Jax had awakened disagreed vehemently. 4 days after their last meeting, Lyra received an official communication from the Xylan Science Academy. Her recent work had been deemed significant enough to warrant consideration for an accelerated advancement to senior researcher status, a promotion that would normally take at least another 3 years to achieve. The notification included an invitation to return to Xylos Prime for a formal assessment and potential placement in a prestigious research division. It was everything she had worked toward since beginning her academic career: recognition, advancement, the opportunity to conduct groundbreaking research with the Academy's full resources at her disposal. And all it required was returning to the ordered, controlled environment of Xylos, leaving behind the chaotic, vibrant experiences she had discovered on Nexus. Leaving behind Jax. The decision should have been simple. Logical. Yet as Lyra sat in her precisely arranged quarters, staring at the official notification, she felt none of the satisfaction she had always assumed would accompany such an achievement. Instead, she found herself remembering the sound of Jax's laugh, the warmth of his hand, the way his questions constantly challenged her to see beyond her carefully constructed frameworks. She thought of the stellar music map and cloud puffs and the small corner of his chaotic room that he had organized just for her. With sudden clarity, Lyra realized she was facing the most important choice of her life. And for the first time, logic alone would not provide the answer. The day of Jax's departure arrived with a storm of activity throughout Nexus Station. A solar flare had disrupted several key systems, causing delays in docking procedures and communication networks. Lyra's research team had been tasked with helping to restore the xenolinguistic translation matrices used for interspecies emergency protocols, keeping her busier than usual and effectively preventing any possibility of seeing Jax before his departure. Or so she told herself. The truth, which she acknowledged only in the privacy of her thoughts, was that she had deliberately volunteered for the emergency assignment. Seeing Jax again would only make her decision more difficult, more emotionally clouded. Better to maintain distance, to allow logic and reason to guide her choice about the Academy's offer. By mid-afternoon, the emergency systems had been restored, and Lyra returned to her quarters to prepare her formal response to the Academy. She had drafted and discarded 17 versions already, none of them feeling quite right. As she sat at her terminal, the station's automated announcement system informed all residents that normal operations were resuming, including scheduled departures from all bays. Among the listed vessels was the Stardanza, Jax's ship. He was leaving. Now, without conscious decision, Lyra rose from her seat and moved toward the door. She hesitated at the threshold, uncertainty freezing her in place. What would she say to him? What could she say when she herself was still torn between worlds? Her communication device chimed with an incoming message. It was from Research Coordinator Vexel, requesting her immediate attendance at a debriefing about the emergency protocol's restoration. Duty called, as it always had, as it always would if she allowed it to define her existence. Lyra made her decision. 20 minutes later, she was running through the corridors of Nexus Station toward Bay 12, ignoring the startled looks from other residents. Xylan adults did not run without emergency justification. Xylan adults did not ignore direct requests from research coordinators. Xylan adults did not pursue cargo pilots to docking bays moments before departure. But perhaps she was more than just a Xylan adult now. When she reached Bay 12, the massive doors were already closed. The departure sequence initiated. Through the observation window, she could see the Stardancer, a compact cargo vessel with obvious modifications and repairs, preparing for launch. "Wait," she called, knowing no one could hear her through the reinforced barrier. "Please wait." A Bay technician approached her, concern evident on his draconian features. "Is there a problem, researcher?" "That vessel is cleared for immediate departure. I need to speak with the pilot," Lyra explained, struggling to maintain her composure. "It's a matter of significant importance." "I'm afraid that's not possible," the technician replied, gesturing to the status displays. "Communication systems are locked during pre-launch. They'll be in jump space within minutes." Lyra watched helplessly as the Stardance's engines powered up, the characteristic blue glow intensifying around its drive section. Too late. She was too late. Then, inexplicably, the engines dimmed. The status display shifted from departure imminent to sequence paused. The Bay technician frowned at his control panel. "That's odd. The pilot has requested emergency docking retention. That's going to cost him a significant penalty fee." The Bay doors began to cycle open. Lyra's heart raced with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Had Jack somehow seen her? Or was this delay unrelated? Her question was answered moments later when Jax himself emerged from the airlock connecting to his ship. He scanned the Bay area quickly, his expression tense until his eyes found Lyra. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Lyra moved toward him, suddenly uncertain what to say now that he was actually here. All her carefully considered logical arguments seemed to evaporate in the warmth of his presence. "You're going to cost me a month's worth of profits and docking penalties," Jack said as she approached, but his tone held no reproach. "Worth every credit, though." "How did you know I was here?" Lyra asked. "I didn't," Jax admitted, "but I couldn't leave without trying one more time to see you. I was actually about to come find you when I saw you on the Bay monitor." His expression grew more serious. "What are you doing here, Lyra?" A dozen possible responses raced through her mind. Explanations, justifications, logical frameworks for her presence. In the end, she chose the simplest truth. "I didn't want you to leave without knowing that I care about you too." The words felt strange in her mouth. Simple, human words with complex, overwhelming meaning. Yet saying them aloud brought a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into proper alignment. Jax's eyes widened slightly, then softened. Even though it complicates everything, even though it doesn't fit into any Xylan research category. Precisely because of those things, Lyra said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I've been offered a position at the Xylan Science Academy, a significant advancement." "That's fantastic," Jax said, though his expression dimmed slightly. "When do you leave for Xylos?" "I haven't accepted yet," Lyra replied. "In fact, I've requested a 6-month extension of my current assignment on Nexus to fully develop the implications of my recent methodological breakthrough." Hope flickered across Jax's features. 6 months is a long time. Lots of cargo runs in 6 months. I believe that would provide adequate opportunity for continued comparative cultural research, Lyra agreed, the corners of her mouth lifting in what felt like a very un-Xylan smile. "With a particular focus on disorganized human living spaces," Jax suggested, taking a step closer to her. "Among other areas of interest," Lyra confirmed, not retreating from his proximity despite the curious glances from Bay personnel. Jax's smile broadened. "I still have to make this Proxima Centauri run. The client's already paid, and I've got a perfect delivery record to maintain." "Of course," Lyra nodded. "Professional obligations must be honored." "But when I get back," Jax continued, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear, "I was thinking we could explore some other uncharted territories together. If you're interested in that kind of research." The double meaning was clear, sending a wave of warmth through Lyra's body. I find myself increasingly drawn to exploratory methodologies, she replied, maintaining the pretense of professional discussion despite the growing warmth in her cheeks. Jax laughed, that free, unrestrained sound that had first begun to crack the careful shell of her Xylan reserve. 3 weeks, he said. Think you can stay out of trouble without me that long? I believe I can manage, Lyra assured him with mock seriousness, though the organization of my quarters may suffer from lack of your influence. Save that for when I get back, Jack said, his eyes bright with promise. We've got 6 months to figure out the perfect balance of chaos and order. The bay announcement system chimed, warning of the rescheduled departure. Jax glanced back toward his ship, then returned his gaze to Lyra. I have to go, he said reluctantly. I know. He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand, squeezing it gently. See you soon, Professor. I'm not a professor, Lyra corrected automatically. Yet, Jax winked, echoing their earlier conversation. With a final squeeze of her hand, he turned and walked back toward his ship, pausing at the airlock to look back at her once more before disappearing inside. Lyra remained in the observation area as the Stardancer completed its launch sequence and gracefully departed from Nexus Station. Unlike their previous parting, she felt no emptiness or doubt, only a warm certainty and anticipation for his return. As she finally turned to leave the bay, she noticed the bay technician giving her a curious look. Friend of yours? The Draconian asked, gesturing toward the now empty docking area. Lyra considered the question. Friend seemed inadequate, colleague inaccurate, partner premature. The Xylan language had no precise term for what Jax had become to her. Yes, she said simply. A very important friend. 3 weeks would pass quickly enough. She had research to continue, a breakthrough to develop, and perhaps a few small changes to make to her quarters, creating space, as Jax had done, for someone different yet complementary. For a future that combined the best aspects of order and chaos. And when Jax returned, they would begin exploring that uncharted territory together. A journey with no predetermined destination, but with the promise of discovery that neither of them could have imagined alone.